You guys tell me, like, there's not one match that I ever watched of Triple H's with anybody that I ever thought was like, oh, that's a great match, or I never ever wanted to wrestle him.
He was unbearable. That is what Bret Hart said. Not about one man, about 6 of them. 6 wrestlers who made Bret's skin crawl, who got under his nerve, who he could not stand sharing a ring with. And when you hear the names, you will understand exactly why. First, you need to understand the man who made the list. Because without understanding him, the names mean nothing. Bret Hart was not like other wrestlers. Not even close. He came from the Calgary dungeon. That was a real place. Basement. Unforgiving space where Bret's father, Stu Hart, trained wrestlers the proper way. Kind of training that made grown men tap out from holds, not from storylines. Kind of training that taught you one thing above everything else. You protect the man in the ring with you. You make it look brutal. You make it look convincing. But you make absolutely sure that when the bell rings at the end, the other man walks out on his own 2 feet. It was Bret's code from the very beginning, and he lived by it. He truly did. Throughout his entire career in the WWF and later in WCW, Bret prided himself on a single fact. He never legitimately hurt an opponent. Not once. You can go through the whole list of men he wrestled over 2 decades, and you will not find one who can say Bret Hart put them in hospital with a careless move. It mattered enormously to him. It was not just a statistic, it was his identity. If you are enjoying these real stories, use the hype feature and give hype to this video as we go. That code, that deep commitment to safety, athletic honesty, and the right way to do things also made Bret a very difficult man to satisfy. Because when you hold yourself to that standard for that long, you start holding everyone else to the same standard. And when they fail, you feel like they have disrespected the craft itself. Bret named 6 men he hated facing in the ring. 6 men who, in different ways and for different reasons, violated what he believed wrestling should be. And when you go through the list, you can hear his exact standards in every single complaint. Safety, professionalism, earning your spot, respecting the next man coming up, those were his values. Every name on this list broke at least one of them. But here is the thing about Bret Hart that you need to carry with you through all 6 names. He was often right, genuinely, provably right. But being right became his whole personality. He held on to grievances like they were treasures. He filed injuries away in a cabinet in his mind and revisited them years, sometimes decades later. He could not let things go. And while that kept the record accurate, it also kept him locked in rooms from the past, long after the doors had opened. Bret may have been one of the finest wrestlers who ever lived, but holding on was also one of his most persistent qualities. Quality runs through every name on this list, like a thread through a cloth. Pull it, and the whole thing comes apart. So here are the 6 men, the ones Bret Hart hated facing, starting with the one who did not just upset him or insult him or block his career, starting with the one who ended everything. And before we go through each name, it is worth saying one more thing about the dungeon. People use the word legendary to describe it, and that is accurate enough, but it misses something important. The dungeon was not a gym in any normal sense. It was a basement in the Hart family home in Calgary. It was cold, it was cramped, it smelled of sweat and effort, and the men who went through it either came out hardened or they did not come out at all. Bret came out hardened. He came out believing that wrestling was a serious discipline that deserved to be treated with respect. He came out with the kind of pride in his work that most people only find in professions the world takes far more seriously than wrestling. Pride never left him. Not when he was WWF champion. Not when he was in WCW. Not after his career ended. Even now. That pride is the river that runs under everything else in this story. 6. Bill Goldberg, December 19th, 1999. Washington, D.C., the MCI Center. WCW Starrcade. Biggest show of the year for World Championship Wrestling. Bret Hart was the WCW World Heavyweight Champion walking into that building. He was supposed to be one of the biggest stars in the company. He had come from WWF carrying a legacy and a reputation. And that night, in the main event, he was wrestling Bill Goldberg. Now, Goldberg was a phenomenon. There is no way around that. He had been built into one of the biggest stars in wrestling seemingly overnight. He ran through opponents. He was enormous, he was fast, and he was explosive in a way that crowds responded to immediately. The booking of his undefeated streak had made him a massive attraction. But inside the locker room, and especially among the men who had to share a ring with him, the story was very different. Goldberg was considered genuinely reckless. He moved fast and he moved hard, and he did not always know where his body was going. Combination made experienced wrestlers nervous in ways that most people watching from the stands could never appreciate. Bret knew it going in, and that night, the worst happened. During the match, Bret whipped Goldberg into the ropes. Goldberg came reversing back. As he turned, he threw a kick and called out to Bret, saying, "Watch the kick." But the space was too restricted. There was nowhere for Bret to move in time. Goldberg's right foot connected directly behind Bret's right ear at the base of his skull. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Bret later described the feeling as if someone had taken a hockey stick and chopped him across the back of the head. Disorientation was severe. Everything felt wrong, but the cameras were still on. The crowd was still watching. Bret Hart, being Bret Hart, kept going. He finished the match. He went home and he told himself it was a sore neck. He had been sore before. He had worked through soreness his entire career. This was the same. This was manageable. He kept taking 4 Advils every 3 hours. He kept wrestling. He worked 9 more matches over the following days without telling anyone how badly he had been hurt. Finally flew back to Calgary. The truth became impossible to ignore. He went to see Dr. Willem Meewis, a specialist who worked with NHL players on concussion injuries. The doctor was alarmed immediately. Bret was slurring his words. When the doctor examined the back of Bret's skull, pressing on the area that had been struck, he described what he felt as hamburger. There was a physical depression in the bone, a quarter-sized dent gone inward. The diagnosis was severe concussion and post-concussion syndrome. On January 16, 2000, Bret relinquished the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. He never competed again as an active, full-time professional wrestler. The match at Starrcade, the kick, the decision to keep going that night, all of it had cost him the rest of his career. Bret has never softened on Goldberg. Not once, not even slightly. He said Goldberg was the most uncoordinated, most dangerous worker he had ever been in the ring with in his life. He said Goldberg had no business being in professional wrestling. He said Goldberg ended his career with that kick, plain and simple. Goldberg did apologize. He genuinely did. In 2016, he said publicly that the incident would forever go down in history as the biggest mistake of his career. He said he held Bret in high regard and never wanted to hurt him. For a period, it seemed as if things were at least quietly settled between them. But then Goldberg came back to wrestling. In the late 2010s, he returned to WWE for a series of high-profile, very well-paid nostalgia appearances. He wrestled in Saudi Arabia for enormous sums of money, and Bret watched it all from home. He watched Goldberg still working the same aggressive, stiff, dangerous style he had always worked. He even watched Goldberg have a difficult match against The Undertaker that was painful to see for entirely different reasons. Something in Bret cracked open again. He went public with his resentment. He said the money Goldberg was making in Saudi Arabia should have belonged to him, that those were his millions stolen from him by a careless kick in a Washington arena back in 1999. He also tied his 2002 stroke directly to the prolonged stress and damage from the post-concussion syndrome caused by Goldberg's kick. Goldberg was frustrated by this. He said he had apologized many times. He told Bret to grow up. He said, "Stop being such a prick." He said, "You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot force it to drink. He expressed genuine anger that years of remorse had been met with nothing but more bitterness from Bret. The situation with Goldberg shows both sides of who Bret Hart is. On one side, he is absolutely right. The ring must be safe. Goldberg was genuinely reckless. The injury was genuinely catastrophic. A man's career was genuinely ended. That anger makes complete, understandable sense, and nobody should take it away from him. Number 5. Shawn Michaels. If the Goldberg situation was Bret's deepest physical scar, then Shawn Michaels was where the deepest personal wound lived. This was not simply a professional rivalry between two top wrestlers who happened to clash. This was a genuine war between two men who could not stand one another, played out over years, in locker rooms, on television, in interviews, and ultimately in front of thousands of people at one of the most notorious moments in the history of professional wrestling. Both men were extraordinary workers. Both of them had genuine claim to being among the very finest performers of their generation. They were instrumental in pushing the WWF towards a more athletic, technically demanding style of wrestling. In terms of pure craft, they were two of the best. But in terms of personality, loyalty, and how they conducted themselves away from the cameras, they were a direct collision waiting to happen. The first public explosion came when Michaels made an unscripted comment on live television, implying that Bret was having an affair with a woman named Tammy Sitch, who appeared on screen under the name Sunny. It was a single suggestive phrase, now known simply as the Sunny Days comment, but it landed like a grenade. Bret and Michaels ended up in a physical fight backstage in Hartford, Connecticut. It was real. Michaels briefly left the company afterwards. That should perhaps have been the moment things got addressed and cleared. Instead, the temperature between them only kept rising, and it came to a head on October 12, 1997, in San Jose, California, in a conversation that changed everything. Bret made a decision that evening that actually showed a great deal of class. He went to Michaels privately, before the cameras, before the crowds, before any of it. He told Michaels he was willing to set aside all of their personal issues. He said that if Vince McMahon wanted him to lose the WWF Championship to Michaels cleanly, he was prepared to do exactly that. He was putting the job first. He was offering a professional peace. Given everything that had passed between them, that was not a small gesture. That took something real. Michaels heard the offer. He said he appreciated it. Then he said he would not be willing to do the same for Bret. He would not put Bret over in return. He refused to reciprocate the professional courtesy Bret had just extended. Response genuinely hurt Bret. It told him everything he needed to know about where Michaels stood, and it resulted in Bret exercising the creative control clause in his contract and refusing to lose the WWF Championship to Michaels in Canada. What followed became one of the most discussed moments in the entire history of professional wrestling. Survivor Series 1997 in Montreal, Quebec, Michaels put Bret into Bret's own submission hold, the sharpshooter. At that moment, Vince McMahon gave a direct order. The referee rang the bell. The match was stopped. Title was awarded to Michaels. Bret had not tapped out. He had not submitted. He had been stripped of his championship without his knowledge or consent in a conspiracy involving Vince McMahon, Michaels, and others backstage. Bret realized what had happened almost immediately. He went backstage. He found Vince McMahon and punched him with enough force to leave a black eye on the most powerful man in the WWF. Then Bret left the building and left the company for good. 2010, they came together on live WWE television. They shook hands. They embraced. Both men confirmed it was completely genuine, not choreographed, not a scripted television moment dressed up to look real. It was real. Michaels had by then become a born-again Christian and had spent years genuinely hoping for Bret's forgiveness, believing it was something he needed to lift a weight from his own shoulders. The handshake was as authentic as anything either man had ever done in that ring. Michaels has since spoken about it, all from the vantage point of a mature man. He said he helped Bret put his suspenders on that night. He said he tries to focus on his own life and his work in NXT. He said he does not want to be a bitter old-timer because the world has enough of those. The contrast between those two responses. Michaels moving forward, Bret still circling back, is one of the more honest portraits of who each man is today. Number 4, Hulk Hogan. His issue with Hulk Hogan was about something much broader and much older. It was about power, about who the wrestling business belonged to, and whether the men who had built their names at the top owed anything to the men climbing up behind them. Bret believed they did. He believed that was part of the unwritten contract that made the whole thing work. Hogan, in his view, was the clearest, most deliberate example of a man who broke that contract every single time it was offered to him. The first major moment that shaped Bret's view of Hogan happened at WrestleMania in 1993. Bret was the WWF champion going into that event. He lost the title to Yokozuna in the match, which was part of the plan. Losing the title was not the problem. What happened immediately after is what stayed with Bret for the rest of his life. The moment Bret's match ended, Hulk Hogan appeared. He challenged Yokozuna on the spot. The subsequent match lasted only seconds. Hogan won the WWF Championship without any build-up, without any earned narrative, without putting Bret over in any way. He simply stepped in, took the title, and stepped out. The night that should have laid the foundation for Bret's rise to the very top of the company had been taken over and redirected. Bret believed Hogan had arranged this behind the scenes, and the available evidence strongly supports that belief. Before WrestleMania 9 had even been broadcast, Hogan appeared on a British television program and told viewers he would be challenging Bret Hart for the title and going home as champion. The show had not aired yet. The result was not public knowledge, but Hogan was already announcing it. It was subsequently reported that the company had already been advertising Hogan as the WWF champion for upcoming tour dates in advance of the event, confirming the decision had been made and committed to before the show took place. The momentum Bret should have built from WrestleMania 9 simply did not happen. Place the blame for that squarely on Hogan's willingness to maneuver behind the scenes to protect his own position at all costs. Both men were working in WCW together. The dynamic repeated itself. Bret had come to WCW expecting to be booked as a main event player. That was the level his reputation had earned. But he found himself in flat, uninspiring situations that matched neither his ability nor his profile. He became convinced that Hogan, who held significant creative control in his WCW contract, was working behind the scenes to keep Bret from receiving the booking that would elevate him properly. Documentary. Bret described Hogan as a man who had once been decent, but had become a backstabbing, knife-wielding piece of shit. He described a match they had together as exactly the kind of phony, empty product Hogan would conjure up. Hogan saw wrestling as a self-promotional machine where you used the business to make yourself rich and famous. Bret saw wrestling as an athletic art form with standards worth defending. They were never going to understand each other. Not really. It is easy to look at the WCW situation and wonder whether Bret was being entirely fair. WCW was a complicated place in that era. Hogan was not the only man with power. Booking decisions there during the late 1990s were made in a chaotic environment where many different people were pulling in different directions. He arrived in WCW with a genuine track record. He arrived with a name that should have carried real weight in that company. And instead, nothing happened for him. Company did not build around him. The booking did not reflect either his ability or his reputation. For a man who believed deeply in earning your position through the quality of your work, being quietly overlooked in WCW after everything he had accomplished was both confusing and deeply insulting. Number 3, Triple H. With Triple H, the feeling is quieter, but in some ways more total. It is the anger of a man who simply refuses to accept another man's legitimacy at all, in any context, on any level, called Triple H a phony. He said it plainly and repeatedly. He said Triple H never earned his position. He said Triple H never deserved it. He said the whole explanation for how Triple H ended up at the top of the wrestling business, and later as a powerful executive within it, comes down to one thing. He married Stephanie McMahon, the daughter of WWE chairman Vince McMahon. man, in Bret's view, is the complete story of Triple H, a man with a personal connection to power who used it to write himself into the history books. He went further in his assessment of the work itself. He said there was not a single Triple H match he had ever watched where he thought it was genuinely great. Not one match. In a career spanning decades and hundreds of high-profile bouts, Bret could not identify a single moment that impressed him. He said he never wanted to wrestle Triple H. He saw nothing in him worth pursuing in the ring. His professional dismissal eventually became almost comical when the WWE 2K17 video game was released. Triple H's in-game character was rated higher than Bret's. Bret made his displeasure with this very public. He connected the video game rating to Triple H's real-life ego and his ability to manipulate even small, largely inconsequential situations. Triple H's response was perfect in its indifference. He said he was sorry, but he was hearing a report that someone was upset their video game ranking was lower than his, and he did not even understand how video game rankings worked. He said the locker room could make anything a competition. He was right, and he made Bret look small in the moment without breaking a sweat. Bret's critique of Triple H is not without genuine backing. Jim Cornette, a legendary figure in wrestling management, famously observed that Triple H was always the man who worked with the man who drew money, never the man himself. The suggestion being that Triple H's star was always borrowed from the genuinely bigger stars around him, not generated from his own natural drawing power. Championship reigns Triple H held during what became known as the Reign of Terror, a period roughly spanning 2002 to 2005, were widely criticized for being long, heavy on Triple H, and damaging to the momentum of the television product. But there is a real counter to all of this as well, and it deserves to be said. Triple H was an extraordinarily disciplined professional. He studied the business carefully and deeply. He worked very hard in the gym and on his craft for a very long time. And when he eventually moved into an executive role and took charge of WWE's developmental system, NXT, he built something that became genuinely respected across the wrestling industry. He mentored a generation of performers. He helped develop talent that went on to carry the company. There is a version of Triple H that, whatever you think of his in-ring legacy, proved himself through his executive work in ways that demand acknowledgement. There is also a version of this story where Bret's total inability to acknowledge any merit in Triple H's career is less about accurate criticisms and more about an unwillingness to give credit to anyone connected to the events of November 1997 in Montreal. Triple H was there. Triple H was part of it. And Bret has never stopped being angry about Montreal. Number 2, Ric Flair. Ric Flair is interesting on this list precisely because the source of the hatred is different from everything else on it. There was no career-ending injury here. There was no grand betrayal. There was no title stolen or moment hijacked. Tension between Bret Hart and Ric Flair grew out of something that in some ways should have been simpler, but somehow became just as bitter. It grew out of style, out of ego, out of two men who both believed completely and without qualification that they understood wrestling better than almost anyone else alive, and who absolutely could not accept the other man's version of what wrestling should look like. Both Bret and Flair were regarded as technical wrestlers of the highest level during their respective eras. Both were praised for their ring intelligence, their ability to tell stories inside the rope. In those broad terms, they should have been natural allies. Two traditionalists defending the idea that wrestling required genuine skill and intelligence to be done well, but their actual styles were miles apart. Bret's wrestling was built on physical credibility, athletic movement, realistic submission holds, and an absence of theatrics. His matches were meant to feel like genuine physical struggles. The audience was supposed to believe that what they were watching could really happen. Flair's wrestling was something entirely different. It was built on enormous theatrical energy, animated selling, big dramatic bumps. frequent rule breaking, and above everything else, the chop. Chest chop was Flair's signature offense. The sound, the reaction, the reddening skin, all of it building to crowd participation in a way that was pure showmanship. It worked brilliantly for Flair throughout his entire career. Fans loved it. Other wrestlers could work around it. Bret hated it. He found the repetitiveness genuinely irritating. He felt Flair's style lacked the realistic psychology that wrestling required to be taken seriously. He was bothered by the chops in particular, not just because of how they felt, but because they represented an entire philosophy of wrestling that he disagreed with. Move, chop, react, sell, repeat. That was not Bret's vision of the craft. This disagreement apparently reached a breaking point backstage at some stage. During an appearance on Broken Skull Sessions, Ric Flair was asked which legends had most hated his chest chops. He named Bret Hart near the top of the answer. He said Bret was going to knock him out. He clarified that the full confrontation never quite played out, but the threat was real and the intention behind it was genuine. Bret had reached the point of nearly putting hands on Flair because he could not stand his offense. It is a remarkable thing to sit with for a moment. The situation became political during their time together in WCW. Bret became convinced that Flair, operating in concert with Hogan's influence behind the scenes, was working to prevent him from receiving any meaningful main event push within the company. He said he will always shake his head, wondering why Flair was such a roadblock for him. He said he knows for a fact that Flair made sure the company did nothing for him during that period. Flair has spoken in more recent years about having had a difficult and combative relationship with Bret for a long time before the two eventually reached warmer terms. He has described the wrestling business as something that makes everyone difficult at one point or another. It is a generous and probably honest framing. Bret does not frame it that way. For Bret, it was not just the friction of two difficult men in a competitive environment. It was deliberate, it was targeted, it was sabotage. And the fact that Bret could not prove it conclusively did not weaken his certainty about it at all. Number 1. Jake the Snake Roberts. This one is different from all the others. There is no physical injury at the center of it. There is no career-altering betrayal. There is no years-long political war. There is just Bret Hart responding to a slight with the kind of cold, surgical precision that he was perhaps best at. Jake Roberts said something Bret did not like, and Bret reached into his assessment of Jake Roberts, the person, the professional, and the athlete, and delivered a verdict that has followed Jake ever since. Jake Roberts made a public statement calling Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels the two worst WWF champions of all time. Is a significant thing to say out loud. Jake had never held the WWF championship himself. He had been passed over for that level many times during a career built on promo, character, and psychological storytelling rather than traditional athletic achievement. Here he was ranking the men who had actually held the title and placing them at the very bottom. Bret heard it. Bret answered with everything he had. He started with the gym. He said Jake never went to the gym. He said that if Jake did make it to the gym on any given day, he might manage a single set of an exercise before walking back outside to smoke a cigarette. He said Jake was not a tough man. He said Jake was not a legitimate athlete. He said Jake was strictly a promo. And then, after setting all of that up, he delivered the line. He said Jake was a great worker, great pretend wrestler. That last phrase is the one that carries the weight. It is not simply an insult, it is precise. It acknowledges Jake's skill while simultaneously stripping away the legitimacy Bret values most. Bret is saying, yes, Jake could perform. Yes, Jake could tell a story in the ring. Jake was exceptional at the entertainment side of professional wrestling. The psychology, the character, the ability to make a crowd feel genuine dread from a slow walk and a python. All of that was real, and Bret knew it. But Bret Bret is also saying that none of that counts in the way that matters to him. Pretend wrestling, however brilliantly executed, is still pretend. And Bret Hart did not do pretend. Bret Hart did the real version, the Calgary Dungeon version, kind that required genuine toughness, genuine athletic conditioning, genuine technical skill in the purest sense of that phrase. Jake calling Bret and Michaels the worst champions is, on its own terms, a strange act. It is a man criticizing people for succeeding at a level he never reached himself, using a criteria of judgment that conveniently favors the kind of thing he was good at and dismisses the kind of thing he was not. The pattern across all 6 names on this list is consistent. His belief in what wrestling could be was sincere and worth defending. Even a list that long, even a list held this tightly, is the hitman. That is Bret Hart. All of it. The man who came out of a cold basement in Calgary with a code. The man who kept that code through 2 decades in the roughest business in entertainment. The man who watched the business change around him and largely refused to change with it, not out of stubbornness alone, but out of genuine belief that what he had been taught was worth protecting. 6 men made the list. Each of them, in his eyes, fell short of what wrestling required from you. Bret made sure the world heard about it. That is very Bret Hart. All of the excellence and all of the anger, all of the precision and all of the refusal to let things quietly pass is Bret Hart. And despite everything on this list, or perhaps even because of all of it, the remarkable body of work he left behind in that ring still stands tall. It always will.